this. So again, Omni put this video out talking about jumper groups are done for in Rise of Kingdoms. Now, again, a lot of us know in COD that, for the most part, jumping has really, I mean, again, they did remove it, but they did it earlier than they did RoK. RoK had this for far longer, right? It was 6 years compared to us, which is basically a year, right? Year and a half, give or take, that jumping was a thing. And then obviously, it got removed. Well, I guess it got removed recently, but you can still do it. It's just, again, it was a much shorter lifespan for COD than it was for RoK. So let's watch this. We're going to react to it. And I'm really curious to kind of hear what he says when he talks about.
Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but based on this in-game mail, it seems like Rise of Kingdoms just completely killed the ability for new players to jump to new servers, thus ending what we would once call a jumper project. So today, let's talk about it, the pros, the cons, my thoughts and opinions and everything. But first, of course, what's going on, guys? Rise of Kingdoms. We hope you enjoy the game. Now, for those of you who are unaware, a beginner's immigration item was effectively an item that you would get similar to a teleport that would allow players under, I think you had to be under City Hall level 8. So as long as you were City Hall level 7 and below, I believe, then you were able to not only teleport to a location, but actually teleport to an entirely new kingdom. So what players would do is they would create an account in a brand new server. They would play the game for a few days and they would get as strong as possible in those few days while maintaining the City Hall requirement, staying under that level. They would do all of the early server events and they would chain barbarians, or not chain necessarily, but fight barbarians, right? And I'm not here to tell you that jumper groups are bad, because there are definitely good things about jumper groups, and I will try to remember to talk about that later in this video. But as far as I'm concerned, this change is probably one that they should have made like 2 years ago, at the very least, right? I think that the writing was kind of on the wall here. I feel like they've constantly, and by they I mean the developers, have constantly been making sort of updates to the way that you can immigrate in the early game. They've also made updates to nerf the ability to go back to KVK2, for example, right? So there's been lots of instances over the last couple of years, I would say, where they would make it harder and harder for old players to ruin the experience of new players, so to speak. And so removing the beginner's immigration item is not that surprising to me. I think they probably should have.
Okay, so what I will say here is there's, at least for what he said so far, there's two completely different things people have to understand. Being able to migrate, like what we know with permits and what they know with migration scrolls or whatever they're called there, I'm forgetting now, passports. That's you taking an established account from an older kingdom, older season, to a newer kingdom, newer season. I'm not saying the newest season, the newest kingdom. And with an immigration, with a beginner's immigration, what you're talking about is taking a slightly boosted account that is new, that was capped at having to stay at level 7 or CH7. So you couldn't really go. Now, again, if you did it the other way, there's a little bit of a workaround here, right? I think people refer to them now as sleepers, which is funny because I didn't realize like what I had done before after it was first introduced. And we did it basically because our project, when the update dropped in RoK, we actually did this. And I guess people are now coining the term sleepers. And I finally heard someone explain what it was. And I was like, oh yeah, we did this right after the update dropped. We just didn't call it anything, right? We called it quad jumping back when you could do it. And then obviously triple jumping once they removed you being able to have 2 beginner immigration teleports. But what he's talking about is on one side, it's using permits to migrate an established account into a younger kingdom, younger season, versus using your beginner immigration item, which only lets you max out at level 7, and then you go into the newest kingdom, ideally. Right. So again, it's not necessarily an apples to apples. He's really talking about 2 completely different things. So I don't really count that as being, oh, well, this is a factor. Right.
done it a very long time ago. And I know that, you know, this is probably not an unpopular opinion, but this is a good thing for the health of the game. Truthfully, it just is. And you know, this video that I'm recording is not a sponsored video. Okay, the developers did not sponsor this video. I know I'm a partnered creator with Rise of Kingdoms,
sure they wouldn't.
and you know, you might say that I'm biased here, but
yeah,
the
you
truth
are.
is that you can go back through the years of me making content, and I've been very consistent with my opinion on the fact that things that are bad for brand new players should not be in the game, right? I know when they removed the ability to, or severely limited the ability to migrate back to kvk2 on day one, I was saying, you know, I know that people like doing this, but it's for the health of the game. I understand that and I support it. And so once again, I find myself in the exact same scenario over and over and over again, where, you know, this was a very popular strategy for veteran players, but it was not good objectively for the health of the game. And again,
okay, so I just want to state this for the record, right? Veteran players and people who were playing for a while did use this, but this was also widely used by new players as well, right? That's a major component here that I don't know if he will touch on. Secondly, I want to point out that nothing Omniarch has said so far specifically speaks to what are his reasons, validations, justifications for why he feels this is mostly a good idea on it being removed. I haven't heard one yet, right? He's made like 2 comparison examples, but nothing that specifically is towards why this should be removed. So again, let's see if he does specifically say anything.
It's not to say that there's only bad things happening here, like a jumper group. You know, the thing about jumper groups is that it's a community oriented project. It's a community organized project that brings lots of players together and effectively forms its own sub community within the game. And that's really good for the health of the game for that community, right? If you have a group of 100 people that are all doing a jumper group together, then you are a part of a community and you're more likely to enjoy your time playing Rise of Kingdoms. You're more likely to continue playing Rise of Kingdoms. And also, you know, it's let's be honest here, jumping is, or was I should say, a good strategy for free-to-play players, right? Because they could get a couple of days of advantage before, you know, the whales start to whale up in that new kingdom. So it's not like jumper projects were all bad, but the problem is that when you have 100
so I will say this, man, it's nice that he acknowledged and he said something really important here that I don't know how many people really caught. He said a couple days worth of an advantage, which really is in actuality just the gosh darn truth. Because no matter how hard you grind and no matter how much you min-max, even if you perfected, which is not a word, but we're just going to say it is for now, your account 100 over 100 for everything you could do as a free-to-play within those, you know, what usually is about 6 days, you still would only be maybe there for a couple days, right? And once people start spending, you know, you will effortlessly be lost on that, you know, post first week.
veteran players jumping into a new server with a 3-day advantage, or however many days you've been waiting, it really crushes the competition in that new server. And some of those players that are in that server are, most of the players are organically new players, right? And so these new players see that everyone around them is gaining all this power so quickly and they don't know what to do, and these big alliances are forming and they're not a part of it. They're excluded, they can't join because it's part of a jumper group and they're maxed out already, right? And so it causes tension there. And as a new player, you know, for me back when I started playing, jumping might have been a thing, but I literally started like at launch, okay? And so the only people that have played longer than me are the people who played in beta, basically. And so, you know, jumping might have been a thing, but it was not a big organized like strategy that, you know, everyone knew about. It wasn't a thing, so I didn't have to deal with it when I first started playing. But I can imagine how frustrating it would be if I just started playing a brand new game on day one and I realized that on day one I'm already multiple days behind other people, simply because I didn't know that the meta was to like create a new account and then like hold it back artificially and then like plan with a bunch of other people to like move to another kingdom. It just, it's not a strategy that brand new players were using, right? Some were, because they would like go, you know, and look on YouTube and all this other stuff, but like most players were not doing that. They were starting into Kingdom, they were, just playing the game organically. And, based on this, I suspect that the developers have, kind of weighed the pros and cons and said, you know what, it's actually just not worth it to continue to allow jumper projects to exist, because there's a chance, and a good chance, I would say, that it ruins the new player experience for organically new players just trying Rise of Kingdoms for the first time, right? And the truth.
Okay. So I was waiting for him to kind of get to a stopping point. So two things he said here. One is that is the jumper environment truly ruining the new player experience? I would argue no, it's not. And let me cite some specific reasons here. For someone who has done a number of jumper projects, thank you, across 3 different games, I have ran some of the largest, if not the largest, jumper projects in Rise of Kingdoms history, in Infinity Kingdom history, and damn sure Call of Dragons history. No one in RoK that I know of has ever ran projects with 12 to 15 alliances worth of play. And I'm talking having those ready to go on zone 1. Most projects are like 2 to 4 alliances, give or take. Maybe you'll see some on the higher end at like 5 or 6, but it's usually very minimal. Most of the time, there's like that 2 to 4 sweet spot. I'm over here running projects. Keep in mind, the very first project I ran, and every project I've ran, has never had less than 6 alliances that we've had going into zone 1. Oh, sorry, going into the home kingdom or a new kingdom. So again, I'd like to believe I got a little bit of cachet and know a decent bit of what I'm talking about, because I've also done jumping quite a bit and also, like I said, in 3 different games. So what I'll tell you is that part of what Omni is saying here is not necessarily wrong. When you go in to, so I hear Chris is like, so I hear a new project coming. We'll see. I just postponed. I just stopped my recent project that we were running just because we just didn't have enough people that wanted to lead alliances. We had really great participation and it was really good numbers for people that were interested in doing it, but I just didn't have enough leaders. So we'll see if maybe we restart it up at a later point. But let me get to the first point, the first part that he addressed. So it is true that if you are a new player and you have a alliance or 2 or more alliances worth of players that are going into a new kingdom and they've already boosted their accounts, obviously even more if you spend, you might look at that and say, and I'm going to make a great parallel here in a moment. You might look at that and say, okay, well, this alliance is taking over all of the zone 1 objectives. They're not allowing anyone to get to any level 1 passes. They're grabbing so much territory because they're stronger than everyone else, so no one's really building that near them. You can argue that having a little bit stronger of alliances in the beginning can act as a deterrent in a number of different areas. However, what I will tell you is that this on average happens anyways. This is just the new kingdom experience. The only difference is that doing it with jumpers is a little bit more exacerbated. It's a little bit more accelerated. But don't get it twisted. This happens in every new kingdom. And this is just the standard way that it happens. The only thing is that just having a little bit more power allows for you to have a bigger stick. That's all. It's the same stick. It's the same brand. You got it from the same pile. The only difference is that yours might be a little bit thicker and a little bit longer, and it might hurt more when you hit someone with it. That's the only difference. The second part is that when you are going in to a new kingdom as a project, it is incredibly important to understand that the way that kingdom plays out and the way that new player experience is felt is, especially when you're talking about a project landing in a kingdom, is absolutely the result of how that project acts when they go into that kingdom. What is that project's goals? I'll give you an example. I'll give you a couple. Some projects, when they go into a kingdom, they just want to be the number 1 alliance. They don't care about anything else. They want to be the number 1 alliance, and they want to take everything for themselves. You might have other situations where they go in with 2 or more alliances. And what do they want? Well, maybe they just want to be the number 1 alliance in their zone, right? Maybe they don't want competition. Maybe they still want to take the best of the best structures, right? The altars, the statues, etc. And then maybe on the tail end or the opposite end, maybe you get some of those projects like mine that I ran, which was, okay, we want to share. We want the rising tide to lift all boats, or at least as many boats as possible, right? We want to encourage the new players to have a good experience, to not just be forced out immediately, to have places they can continue playing and grow and continue learning the game, enjoying their time playing the game, to where they don't feel like they're being ostracized. But let me also state that where he talks about like players not being able to join certain alliances, dude, this happens anyways. And Omni knows this. Just like anyone who's been playing for a while knows this. Now, you may not know as much of this if you have not done, and maybe I shouldn't say that, right? To assume that Omni would know that or not know it. But let me just simply state that when you are a new player, you will and you're in a new kingdom, you're always going to have some form of a ladder climbing effect. You're always going to have some form of players wanting to climb the ladder, up the rankings, up the leaderboards, trying to get into stronger alliances. Why? Because stronger alliances at the top of the boards have a higher chance of being more active, being more engaged, being more socially active, and potentially spending more money. So, right, because they usually have a little bit more consolidation of top or strong players that are in that kingdom. So again, what he's pointing out to me, I don't really think I would say are like hard justification points on why they would remove it. To me, in my experience, these are soft points, which isn't to say that they're not points at all, but there's just a lot more to it than that. Okay.
Truth is that jumping is a very niche thing. Most players don't do it, right? And I know that it's kind of easy to forget that. For those of us that have been playing the game for years, we know about jumpers. Maybe a lot of you watching have participated in jumper groups, and it seems like a very like obvious thing to do.
So I'll say this: I disagree on the niche part, and the reason I disagree with that is because if it was niche, you wouldn't have almost every new kingdom that's being released have a jumper project in it at one point in time. And even now, if you look at places like the jumper community, JC community, which are, I believe, 2 of the biggest jumper communities in the game right now, and you go and you look at how many projects are pre-selecting kingdoms they're going to, dude, let me give you an example. Even when I was jumping in the first couple years of the game being released, I would organize and coordinate with players. We did it the old-fashioned way, where I had to look at who was posting ads and what their jump dates were, or going into their Discord servers and figuring it out. And then I would DM them and I would make a custom group chat, a DM group chat where you can have up to 10 people in it. And I would add leaders or founders from those groups. And I'd say, okay, well, hey, where are you going? This is where I'm planning to go. Where is everyone planning to go? So we can try to avoid everyone and have our projects land in a home kingdom, right? That was kind of the old fashioned way of doing it. But even back then, years ago, before jumper community, JC community, before they ever existed, and before jumping became as popularized as it is now, we were still at a point years ago where you had it was maybe every other, one every 3. Now it's like one every single one, maybe one every other. So again, I don't think jumping is niche at all. I think it maybe used to be niche within the first year of the game releasing. It is absolutely not niche at all. Like, this is a mainstream community. Just because it doesn't have hundreds of thousands of people doing it, doesn't mean that it's niche per se, right? I would argue it's a lot bigger than I think some people think.
Right, but most players do not do a jumper project. They simply don't, because it's very time intensive. You have to go looking for one, and you have to all coordinate your efforts together. And for a video game that is something that maybe people are just playing casually on their lunch breaks at work, they're just not going to do it, right? They're not going to do it. And so in a world where jumper groups have their pros, of course, I've just gone over them, they're great for small communities, they're great for free-to-play players. The downside is that,
okay, so the only thing I'm going to push back on here is where he says most. I do disagree a little bit, because I think you have to compare the amount of new players that thoroughly learn about jumping versus new players that have no idea about jumping. So let's imagine you're a brand new player, and I'll give you my example. When I was a new player and I played in like the early, like before Kingdom 100 was released, so pretty early on, back when the game was still Rise of Civilizations, Eventually, after I had landed in after I'd made another account in an older kingdom, or a little bit older kingdom at that point, it was like in the mid, I think late 100s, somewhere around there. And at that point, I then learned about jumping. From here on out, and I started researching, and I thought, okay, well, why am I doing anything but this, right? And I understand, and I know that quite a few, or I'll say a lot, and I'll say that confidently, of players, if they fully understood jumping, you can bet your bottom dollar that most of them would do it, especially if they have the capabilities to do it and if they're willing to do it, which in my experience, when people learn about jumping, more often than not, you're signing up for that. So that's the only thing I'll push back on based on my experience. Again, maybe Omni's has seen differently from his POV.
This small subset of the community is negatively impacting like every new player that tries Rise of Kingdoms potentially, right? And I'm not here to say that all jumper projects were, ruling new kingdoms like tyrants and treating people badly. That's not the case. And in many cases, I'm sure that it's quite the opposite, right? People who do jumper groups are so invested in Rise of Kingdoms. They are so passionate about the game that they want to play it again, right? And so like a lot of times these jumper projects probably were very friendly to newer players, but the fact remains that it gives them an unfair advantage over those organically new players. And in a game that is focused around PvP and competition, if I feel like other players have an unfair advantage, I don't want to play anymore, right? And that's just the truth. And I think a lot of new players felt that way. And so I understand the developers' situation that they find themselves in, where the niche communities in Rise of Kingdoms love jumping, but on paper they can probably look at the data and be like, hey, this isn't great for the new player experience. And so truthfully, I'm surprised that this has lasted as long as it did, because really the purpose of the beginner's immigration item, like if we think about it, right, think about what is this item for. The purpose of this item is that if you and a friend both join the game around similar times, but you end up in different kingdoms, you can use that item to just move to another kingdom. Or if you find yourself in a kingdom where like everyone's speaking a language that you don't speak, or whatever the case might be, you can use this to like just move to another kingdom and just try that out, right? Because when you join, you as a new player, you don't even realize that like your kingdom makes a big difference, and it's also completely out of your control. Like if you just see an ad for RoK on YouTube or Instagram or whatever, and you just download the game, you don't realize like how big of an impact your kingdom has on your experience in Rise of Kingdoms. And so that's kind of the function of this item, right? Like you are just being placed in a kingdom against your will. You don't get to choose, the game just throws you in there, right? And so the purpose of this item is to give you a little bit of flexibility to say, okay, well, if it doesn't work out, here's a last ditch effort, right? But the truth is, like, how many people actually use the beginner's immigration item for its intended purpose? I would be willing to bet a very small number of players actually utilized it for its intended benefit, right? I feel like it was mostly used to exploit the ability to jump to another kingdom, right? So
I will say this, right? I do think it's an interesting concept he brings up, as far as if you think about what maybe was the original intent behind a beginner immigration item, or just being able to move from one kingdom to a newer one. I do think there is some merit there. I think there is a little bit of sense that very well could have been one of the reasons. I think the challenge is that you'd have to go all the way back to maybe the beginning of the game to see if they ever spoke to why they introduced such an item. Because could we make the argument that the item wasn't originally intended for people to just mass create groups and projects and go to brand new kingdoms? I feel like that could be a selling point. I feel like that could probably be pretty agreed upon.
At the end of the day, when you have an item in the game that is more often than not using or being exploited rather than used for its actual purpose, that kind of tells you that the item itself is not doing its job, right? And so I can see where the developers would look at that and be like, okay, this actually just isn't even worth it anymore, because it's just doing more harm than it is good. Ooh, we got some chests here, let's go. Oh, 50 gems.
Yeah, so I think the challenge is that when the developers release this announcement, they didn't back it up and support it with any facts, with any data, with any feedback, nothing. And so they kind of left everything up to a guessing game and speculation. And as I've stated, first and foremost, that's just like the worst thing to do, just as a form of strong constructive criticism across the board. You have to give a reason. Regardless if people agree or disagree with your reason, you should still give a reason. Because again, I'll tell you in my experience, based on what some of the things Omni has said and what I've read from some other people, jumping was not as bad as I think some people maybe think it is compared to what the average new player experience is. Because in order to prove that what they're saying is accurate, you would have to go and interview or collect feedback on multiple new players across multiple new kingdoms and ask them. And you'd also have to make sure that a strong project or just a project, and you'd have to get a range of strong to or small to big projects that were landed there and that made it all the way to the final zone. And then you'd have to ask those new players who were not a part of those projects what their feedback was. And I'm just going to tell you, like, that's a long effort. Like, that's a lot of work to do. And I'll be honest, I would only do it if I was making enough money full time to cover content.
More often than not using or being exploited. I started making RoK videos, and I would say that in the summertime is usually when we see a lot of marketing for Rise of Kingdoms, right? Historically, I've noticed that it usually starts in May or June and it goes until like July or August, and I think that coincides with a lot of, you know, kids, at least in the United States, are out of school, right? And so gaming companies will typically increase their ad spending because a lot of these kids are just not, you know, they're home, they're just chilling on their phone. And so like that's a great time to get them to try out your new game, right? Or to try out your game for the first time. And so, you know, to kind of nip this in the bud now, we'll set up Rise of Kingdoms, so, you know, for a couple of months of, you know, a month and a half, 2 months of no jumper groups, and so that way all of those servers are new and organic or whatever. And then by the time, you know, May comes, we see potentially, and again, this is all speculation, I'm just going back based on what I've seen in the past, right? And as a YouTuber, I see the analytics, right? I see viewership goes up organically in the summer when there's a big ad push, right? It just is what it is. And that's why, like, I'll see like my beginner's guides get a lot more views, and so why there's usually a new civilization released every summer. Now for us, I don't think that's going to be the case this teleport. Maybe we will see stronger new player retention, right? Maybe more new players will stick around because those new servers are more just organically new, actual new players, instead of, you know, 200 veterans that are Giga Chad spenders, right? So I think the timing makes a lot of sense. I think that truthfully they probably should have done this years ago. That's my opinion.
Okay. Oh God. Okay. So 2 things he said. First and foremost, there is a way to figure this out. There is a way where data can be pulled to show you what the player retention is in Kingdoms. We have done this a little bit between Fuzzy and myself from the data he pulls from me across the game. The data is available in RoK. It's just the fact that nobody really looks at it, at least among the creators, right? And specifically, I should say, looks at it, posts it, and puts content out, or someone talks about it. But there is a way to figure this out. And again, I'll tell you this much: I wish I had data for RoK, because I would do some amazing stuff with data in RoK. Absolutely. Okay, so. Right, so that's the first thing, is that you can do this. And I would argue that the retention numbers actually, and you could argue if this is going to be a hot take or not, I would argue the average player retention numbers are stronger when jumper groups go to Kingdoms if they're not doing this whole mine thing, right? Like if they're not just trying to take everything for themselves and terrorize, and their objective is not, and again, it depends on their size. If it's like a smaller one and that is the goal, then yeah, I could argue that the numbers are probably going to be about the same. But if you are not, which again, I'll give you a great example. In my example, for the projects I ran, I can absolutely guarantee you that we increased player retention. In every single kingdom I've ever done a project in any game, we always increased retention. Retention probably was the highest for all of the projects I've done, because that was one of our focal points, and we knew how to achieve that. Again, he's talking about the average, but I would still make the argument that when a project goes into a, because this is how you have to look at it. When a project goes into a kingdom, if you have 100, 200, 300 players that are going in, those are usually 100, 200 to 300 players that are most likely going to play longer than the other players that are organically dropping in for the first time as brand new players. So you can kind of say that maybe you could make the argument and say that those numbers could be inflated. I could maybe see that, and I could understand if somebody wants to say it from that point of view. But because of that, you also have to keep in mind that when projects go into kingdoms, they often will provide structure. And what structure am I talking about? Structure and deterrence. Deterrence from players just going out and roguing it up and attacking anyone and everyone. That's such a huge component of projects. And a lot of projects that I have seen that are well ran have at least a component of that worked in where they don't want there to just be crazy civil war happening. So you have to understand that that most projects' goals are to not have civil war when they're going into a new kingdom. They don't want anyone to rogue it up. And two, most of the time in projects, they are not just going out and YOLO Brick Squad 420ing everybody and attacking. Right now, yes, maybe there could be some territory disputes here and there, but jumping has come a long way. Like, you have to understand that kind of what the origin of when jumper groups started to become a thing. What was the main reason projects were being started? Well, they were being started because players wanted to either create kingdoms in their image because they felt that they could do it better. It's kind of like it's like working at a store, loving what you do, but knowing that the company you're at isn't the best that they could be. So you go and you start your own company and you do what they were doing better. Similar idea. Some people did this at the alliance level and some people did this at the kingdom level. But again, I feel like I would give a little pushback there based on my experience, right? It's not to say that Omni's wrong. I do think that he is right in part, but I would give a little bit more of an edge to it actually benefits player retention more than it hurts it. But like I said, we'd have to, and I don't know if I'm going to say overwhelmingly, but I would be a little bit more on that side of the fence than this side of the fence. So, yeah. George, this guy. George is like, not a fan of this guy. I don't know who he is. No, man, no, Omni's a good guy, man. Like, I'm cool with Omni. I haven't talked to him in a little while, but I've always been on good terms. And I do like Omni's content.
And I do think that this is best for the game, right? Because even though you are kind of hurting that small niche community that does like to do the jumper projects, and you can make the argument that, you know, it removes this kind of community oriented aspect of the game, and jumping was good for free-to-play players and it removes that. Those are true, but at the end of the day, the most important.
Yeah, also S. Ravan, thank you for the sub, man. I appreciate you. I'm gonna get some confetti in the chat just because I love you so much.
The most important thing is that a live service game like Rise of Kingdoms has new players constantly joining, right? That is because there's always going to be old players leaving, right? Like as much as the developers can do what we want them to do, they've added commander swaps, they've added armament conversions, they've added tons of quality of life upgrades, they've increased the graphics, they've done so many really good things for the game over the last 12-18 months. No matter what, there's still going to be some percentage of older players that stop playing for reasons that are outside of the developer's control, right? They're older now, they just got married, they just had kids, they just they got a new job and now they can't dedicate as much time to the game. Like, there's so many external factors as to why some players quit Rise of Kingdoms, right? And it's not even exclusive to Rise of Kingdoms. They quit any game, right? Whether it's Fortnite, to have new players that are sort of getting hooked into the game and enjoying the game and sort of replacing those older players at similar numbers, right? And if you look on the back end and say, okay, well, we have fewer new players joining than leaving, well, you have a declining game, right? And the inverse is true. If you have more new players that are joining and joining and joining, they actually ruin the entire game. It's just you don't notice it until months or years down the line when you realize, like, oh, there's actually not as many new players in the game as we thought, right? So all in all,
and I will say this, we can actually see the numbers for this too as well. The numbers should be available in RoK. I don't know all the data people over there and what they're pulling, but I can absolutely tell you right now that if they don't have that data, I mean, my boy Fuzzy must be a freaking Wizard of Oz, because this dude can pull me those numbers, and we've done videos covering this. So part of me feels like if you're going to do a video like this and you're going to talk about what potential numbers are, but you're not showing any numbers. And again, keep in mind, Omni doesn't do a lot of jumping, right? Like, for example, him and Chiz, Gecko, if you look at all the creators, I have probably done the most jumping as a content creator out of at least all the ones I know of. And that doesn't mean that I'm saying, okay, well, listen to me, don't listen to anyone else. What I am saying is that you should be able to showcase some data off here because I know the data is available to talk about what those numbers are. I guess for me, I just would have liked for him to include some of that because I just feel like it really would have added to any of the points that he's bringing up, right? Whether it's making the case or maybe giving him some clarity to maybe speak towards it from a different approach or perspective.
As much as this might be an unpopular opinion, I think it is the cold hard truth that we did need to eventually get rid of jumper projects, and you know, we'll have to wait and see. Now, all of this,
I think the cold hard truth is you need to get
very premature, and I could be wrong about all of this.
Absolutely.
Right? Because what they're saying here is that they're suspending the distribution of beginners immigration items. That's not to say that they won't tomorrow release another mail saying, hey, we're getting rid of the beginners immigration, but we're implementing this new beginners warp item, and it effectively does a similar thing but slightly different. Like this is not necessarily confirmation that jumpers are dead. I just want to be very clear here, okay? But it sure does seem that way without any more.
You know, Omni, you know what I want to say to you, Omni, to your face right now? In that case, why'd you title your video Jumper Groups Are Done For in Rise of Kingdoms, huh? Just giving you shit because I love you.
News, right? And look, they didn't even ask us for our feedback, right? They weren't even like,
yeah,
hey,
so why are you giving it? No. Yo, we're just going in right now.
What do you think about this? Like, no, they're just like, we're deleting it, and so GG, and that's it. So we'll have to wait and see, really, after March 26th, if they do anything to replace the beginners immigration item. It's possible that jumpers will somehow find a way to continue to exist if they add another item to replace this, or some other method or strategy or whatever. Players are always looking for an unfair advantage in these types of games, so it would not be surprising if that were the case. I know there was the sleeper strategy for a while. I don't know if that's still a thing or not. The number one player that I am most concerned for is the Logic Bank here on YouTube. I know that he loved doing jumper projects, sleeper projects, new server projects, things like that, and I don't even know if he was part of projects necessarily, rather than that was just how he enjoyed playing the game. So I'd be really interested to see what the Logic Bank has to say about this change, and hopefully it doesn't affect their enjoyment of the game too much, although I unfortunately feel like it might. Anyway, guys, with that,
all right, that's it, dude. This was good, man. This was a good video because I just think it really talked about a lot of stuff from a couple angles that Omni brought up, and yeah, this was good to kind of sit back and hear, you know, a big creator and like what they think about jumping from their perspective, right? From what they've seen. Panda, what's up? Welcome. Hey, Ben, how we doing today? Doing good. Doing good. I got to think about what I am going to eat after. But yeah, man, I really wanted to react to this one. This is actually pretty good.